Welcome, everyone. Thank you, Kit, and congratulations on your election as president of the board of the Friends, and congratulations to all the other new officers. I know that I speak for all library staff when I say that we would not be the same organization without the support of the Friends. The Friends provide every penny that the library spends on programs. So programs such as summer reading, Arlington Reads, film series, literally everything, as well as supplemental funds for purchasing materials that allow us to take on initiatives that wouldn't be possible otherwise. So a hearty thank you to all of the Friends and all of you in the audience who are Friends. If you're not a friend and you're interested in becoming one, there are membership forms on the table outside in the hall, and I encourage you to pick one up and to learn more about this important organization. Can everyone hear me okay in the back? Thank you. Okay, so tonight's presentation is a perfect example of the kind of program that would not be possible without the help of the Friends. We were delighted when Adam Johnson, author of The Orphan Master's Son, agreed to be with us and share the story behind his timely, original, and critically acclaimed new novel. Mr. Johnson comes to us from California, where he is currently Associate Professor of English with an emphasis in creative writing at Stanford University. A Whiting Writers Award winner and 2010 National Endowment for the Arts Fellow, his fiction has appeared in Esquire, Harper's, Playboy, and Paris Review, among others. He's the author of Emporium, a short story collection, and the novel Parasites Like Us, which won the California Book Award. His books have been translated into 13 languages. His current novel, The Orphan Master's Son, is set in North Korea, one of history's most closed, repressive, and inscrutable societies, and has been praised both for its audacious imagination and its documentary realism. It's the story of Pak Jun-do, homonym for John Doe, who was raised as an orphan, trained to carry out the will of the state, and ultimately becomes one of its casualties. It's the story, too, of a fascinating nightmare nation led by a depraved and obsessed dictator who uses his own storytelling and propaganda to subordinate citizens to his will. How does one write about a people and a place that are so isolated and so secretive? I'm hoping that we're going to learn more about that tonight, but it's my understanding that it entails years of interviews and research followed by firsthand observation. David Ignatius of the Washington Post says it best, I think. A great novel can take implausible fact and turn it into entirely believable fiction. That's the genius of The Orphan Master's Son. Adam Johnson has taken the papier-mâché creation that is North Korea and turned it into a real and riveting place that readers will find unforgettable. Please join me in welcoming Adam Johnson.
Wow, what a great crowd tonight. This must be a thriving library, I can tell. Yeah, not all libraries are thriving this way. It's really true. Just the microphone, how's this sound? Does it sound poppy? Peter Piper picked a peck? No, is it okay? Okay. I'm just going to do it maybe just like this. I'm honored to be here. Thanks to Vicki and Margaret and Kit for bringing me out. I've been lucky to read at some fantastic libraries around America in the last few months. And like I said, a lot of them need a lot of help, and a lot of them are thriving like this one because people are helping. So, okay. Let's see. Has anyone here been to the Democratic People's Republic of Korea? One? When did you go? Oh, yeah, very recent. Good. I'll be very curious to hear your thoughts on the place. It changes almost every year. Someone else in the back? Sir, when were you there? April 2008. Okay, great. Well, hopefully we'll have a Q&A at the end and a discussion, and we can bring in your views as well. I always like to learn of other people's experiences. Often they're strikingly identical, but once in a while people see things that other people don't. So we'll do a Q&A, and afterwards I'm happy to do that. There's a cell phone in the piece that I'm going to read, and if your cell phone goes off, I can perfectly integrate you into my novel. So it's just fair warning. I'm going to read for about maybe like 25 minutes. It's not even the length of a television situation comedy. So if you find it too long, you should really think about how much TV you're watching. I hope you can handle it. But it'll be deep in the book, so it won't make really much sense at all to you. So just let go is what I would say. This section takes place in Pyongyang. One of the main characters of the book, Commander Ga, our fearless Commander Ga, is just a minor character. We'll just see him in the corner. The person who's speaking in these sections or in the first person is an interrogator in Pyongyang, and he is not a torturer. He doesn't like to be called that. For 10 hours, I interrogated Commander Ga, but I could trick him into revealing nothing. Instead of confessing to killing the actress and her children, he only said that they flew away on a big bird to a land of make-believe. If you don't talk to me, I told Commander Ga, the Pubyok will get their turn at you. Commander Ga had a tattoo of this actress on his chest. It was large and deeply inked. He clutched it. I'm not afraid of pain, he said. The first thing the Pubyok will do to you, I told Commander Ga, is take that pretty picture from you. He was dehydrated. He struggled to swallow. You can't separate the two of us, he said. The actress and I, we have no secrets. We've shared everything. His was the toughest citizen biography I'd ever tried to write, but I'd get him to talk eventually. If it was one thing we had no shortage of here in North Korea, it was forever. I hung up my smock at Division 42 and made haste for the subway, hoping to make it home before Pyongyang's power went out for the night. The Kwangbok station, with its beautiful murals of Lake Samji, was my stop. Urchin girls grilled green onion tails on the sidewalk while old-timers played ghost stop in the twilight. On the streets, I bartered Commander Ga's military medals for cucumbers and sesame paste. Apartment lights slowly came to life, and you could see that no one lived above the 9th floor of their apartment buildings. The elevators never worked, and if they did, the power was bound to go out and trap you between floors. My building was the glory of Mount Pektu, and I lived on the 22nd floor, a height that made sure my elderly parents never went out unattended. Inside, I cooked them dinner. When they tasted the food, they praised Kim Jong-Il for its flavor. And when I asked after their day, they said it certainly wasn't as hard as the day of the dear leader Kim Jong-Il, who carried the fate of the people on his back. You see, their eyesight failed at the same time, and ever since, they'd become paranoid that there might be someone around they can't perceive, ready to report them for anything they say. They listen to the loudspeaker all day and are careful never to reveal a personal feeling, lest it get them denounced by a stranger they can't lay their eyes on. The next day, a citizen was apprehended with a cellular telephone, which he claimed Commander Ga had given him for safekeeping. The battery was long since dead, and I couldn't help thinking that all of Commander Ga's secrets were stored inside. That was nonsense what he said about having no secrets. Even as I strapped my subjects into the autopilot and cranked up the electricity, even when it didn't matter anymore, they kept on confessing. I opened and closed the phone, how to get it to talk. My parents' vision had become so bad that when I arrived home, I had to tell them that night had fallen. I helped them to their cots, placed side by side near the stove. They stared at the ceiling with their blank eyes. My father's eyes had gone white, but my mother's were clear and expressive. I sometimes suspected that maybe her vision wasn't as bad as his. Mother, Father, I said, I have to go out for a while. My father said, May the everlasting wisdom of Kim Jong-Il guide you. Obey the curfew, my mother said. I had Commander Ga's wedding ring and his cell phone in my pocket. Mother, I said, can I ask you a question? Yes, son. How come you never found a bride for me? Our first duty is to country, she said, then to our leaders, then to, I know, I said, then to the party, then to the charter of the Workers' Assembly, and so on. But I was in the youth brigade. I studied Juche ID at Kim Il-sung University. It's just that I have no wife. You sound troubled, my father said. I saw the fingers twitch on his right hand. When I was a boy, one of his gestures was to reach out with that hand and ruffle my hair. That's how he would reassure me when we saw neighbors being transported or executions in the soccer stadium. So I knew he was still in there, that despite the distemper of his patriotism, my father was still my father. Outside, on Sunuju Street, even in the dark, I could see that troops of Juche girls had chalked the sidewalks with revolutionary slogans. I headed for the Ragwon-dong district, where long ago the Japanese built slums to house the most defiant Koreans. That's where there's an illegal night market at the base of the abandoned Ryugyong Hotel. Crossing the Palgal Bridge, pipes were dumping sewage from the pastel housing blocks, and in the water, shit-streaked pages of the Rodong Sinmun newspaper spread like gray lily pads. The deals took place around the rusted elevator shafts. A few sellers didn't like the look of me, but one was willing to talk. He was young, and his ear had been notched by a Pubyok agent. I handed him Commander Ga's phone. He pulled the battery, licked its contacts, then checked the internal card. This is good, he said. What do you want for it? I'm not selling it, I said. I need a charger for the thing. I showed him Commander Ga's wedding ring. He laughed. Unless you're selling the phone, he told me. Get out of here. Several years ago, after an April 15th ceremony, the local Pubyok squad got drunk at Division 42, and I took the opportunity to lift one of their badges. I pulled it out now and let it gleam in the dark. I said I need a phone charger, I told him. Let me see this, he said, and he took the badge, feeling its weight. You'll get your charger, he said, but keep the ring. I trade for this. The phone charged all night. Its little light glowing yellow as I cooked my parents' breakfast the next morning. Morning news from the loudspeaker had them depressed. There'd been a big story about poverty and starvation in South Korea. Luckily, Kim Jong-Il was sending them food aid, my father said. I only hope they can hang on to reunification. It was while we were eating our porridge that the phone's light turned green. I toyed with the device, scrolling through its menus. My father heard its funny beeps and tones. Have you got something there? He asked. No, I told him. For a moment, it felt like my mother glanced at the phone, but when I looked up, she was staring straight ahead. I passed it back and forth before her eyes. I returned to the keypad. I tried to think of someone to call, a friend, a colleague, a relative, a woman. Father, I said, if you were to contact someone, who would it be? Why would I contact anyone, he asked. I have no need. It's not a need, I said. Wouldn't you want to call a friend or a relative? Our party comrades fulfill our needs, my mother said. Well, what about your aunt, I asked my father. Don't you have an aunt in the South? My father's face went blank. We have no ties to that capitalist nation, he said. My mother said, we denounce her. I'm not asking as a state interrogator, I told him. I'm your son. This is just family talk. I returned to the phone, moving through its functions, all of which seemed disabled. It looked like I'd be selling the thing after all. But wait, I said. When I was a boy, you used to play cards with a couple from the factory. Aren't you curious what happened to them? Wouldn't you contact them if you could? I don't believe I've heard of these people, my mother said. I'm sure of it, I told her. I remember them clearly. No, she said, you're mistaken. Mother, it's me. There's no one else in the room. No one's listening. Stop this dangerous talk, my father said. We met with no one. I reached to take his hand. The touch surprised him, and he recoiled. "Father, it's me, your son. Take my hand," I said. "Is this a test?" he asked me. He looked wide-eyed around the room. "Are we being tested?" There's a talk that every father has with his son, in which he brings the child to understand that there are things that we must say on the outside, while inside, we're still family. I was 8 when my father had this talk with me. We were under a tree on Moranbang Hill. He told me that there was a path set out for us. On it, we had to do everything the signs commanded and heed the announcements along the way. We must walk this path alone on the outside, but inside, we would be holding hands. On Sundays, the factories were closed, so that day the air was clear, and I could imagine this path ahead, stretching across the Taedong Valley. We were eating blueberry-flavored ices and listening to the sounds of old men at their Changi boards. My father said to me, "I denounce this boy for having a blue tongue." We laughed about that. I pointed at my father. "This citizen eats mustard," I said. I'd recently tried mustard for the first time, and the look on my face had made everyone laugh. My father addressed an invisible authority in the air. "This boy has counter-revolutionary thoughts about mustard. He should be sent away to correct his mustardly thinking." We laughed. "Now take my hand," he told me. I put my small hand in his, and then his mouth became sharp with hate. He snapped, "I denounce this citizen as an imperialist puppet who should be remanded to stand trial for crimes against the state." His face was red and venomous. "I've witnessed this boy spew capitalist diatribes in an effort to poison our minds with his traitorous filth." The old men turned from their game to observe us. I was terrified, at the edge of crying. My father said, "See? My mouth said that, but my hand, it was holding yours. If your mother must ever say something like that to me in order to protect the two of you, know that inside, she and I are holding hands. And if someday you must say something like that to me, I'll know it's not the real you. Inside is where the father and son will always be holding hands." He reached out and ruffled my hair. At work, I took all my frustrations out on Commander Ga, interrogating him relentlessly, but he only begged for the can of peaches that he'd been carrying when we arrested him. "What's so special about these peaches?" I asked, and studied the can. I myself hadn't had a peach since they closed the canning factory after botulism killed half of Nampo. We'd waterboarded Commander Ga over and over. "Bowl" is all he could say, and "spoon." That night, I felt weak, like my body was hungering for some kind of food I'd never run across. I thought of the dogs in the Central Zoo that lived only on cabbage and old tomatoes. When I turned to go home, I found the subway had shut down, and the queue for the Kwangbok Express bus was 3 blocks long. I started walking. I didn't make it 2 blocks before I heard the bullhorns and knew I was in trouble. The minister of mass mobilization was sweeping up any citizen unlucky enough to be out on the street. You couldn't run. If they even thought you were trying to avoid volunteering for harvest duty, it was off to a redeemability farm. It was, however, the kind of thing that a Pubyok badge could get you out of. Without it, I found myself in the back of a dump truck headed to the countryside to pull rice for 16 hours. We drove northeast by moonlight toward the silhouetted Pyongyang range, the driver flashing his headlamps when he thought he saw something in the road, but there was nothing. No people, no cars, nothing but empty highways lined with tank traps. In the dark, we found a peasant village somewhere along the Chonchon River. A city folk, about 30 of us, climbed down to sleep on the open ground. I had my smock to keep me warm. For 5 years, I'd used a badge to escape these harvest details, so I'd forgotten the sounds of crickets in the summer, the pungent mist that rises off rice water. I heard children in the dark, and the sounds of a man and woman engaged in what must have been genital intercourse. What followed was my best night's sleep in years. There was no breakfast, and my hands blistered before the sun was fully up. Why we drained one field and flooded another, I had no idea. But light dawned hard on the peasants of Pyongyang province. They all wore cheap, ill-fitting Vinalon clothes. Their bodies were rail-thin, their teeth translucent to the black cores. In the afternoon, a city woman was struck by a grand snake, long as a man. I tried to quiet her screams by stroking her hair, but that snake must have done something to her. She started hitting me and pushing me away. The peasants caught the twisting snake, black as the befeckled water that had concealed it. Some wanted to take its gallbladder. Others wished to milk its venom for liquor. I tried to convince them to free the snake, arguing that another black snake must be out there somewhere, waiting for this broad swimmer to make its way home. It was midnight when I made it home. Though the key turned in the lock, the door wouldn't open. It was somehow barricaded from within. I pounded on the door. "Mama," I called. "Father, it's me, your son. There's something wrong with the door." There was no answer. Eventually, I buttoned my smock and lay down in the hallway. I stared at the concrete ceiling and thought of the peasants with their children and their loud intercourse, of how, except for starvation, they didn't have a care in the world. Beside me in the dark, Commander Ga's phone lit green and went beep. On its screen, I discovered a picture. A Korean woman and her children stood smiling against a sunny blue sky. They wore black caps with ears that made them look like mice. Come morning, the door was standing open. Inside, my mother was cooking porridge while my father sat at the table. "Who's there?" my father asked. "It's me, Father, your son." "Well, thank goodness you're back," my father said. "We were worried about you." My mother said nothing. At work, I had pulled my parents' secret files, trying to find clues as to why they were so difficult. Getting information out of strangers was easy, not so with my parents. Now, on the table, I could see those files had been rifled. "The door was blocked last night," I said. "Didn't you hear me?" "I didn't hear anything," my father said. "Wife, did you hear anything?" "Nothing," she said from the stove. I straightened the files. "I suppose you two have gone deaf now as well." My mother shuffled to the table with the bowls of porridge. I asked, "But why then was the door locked?" "You're not afraid of me, are you?" My mother said, "The loudspeaker announced that the American Navy was conducting aggressive military exercises off the coast. When it comes to the Americans," my father said, "you can't take any chances." They blew on their food and took quiet spoonfuls. "How is it," I asked my mother, "that you can cook so well without your eyesight?" She said, "As the food cooks, the smell changes." In my mother's file, I found a photo of her when she was young. She was a beauty, perhaps the reason she was brought to the capital from the countryside, but what got her sentenced to a factory rather than assigned as a singer or a hostess was not in her record. I ruffled the folders in the air. There were some papers on the table," my father said. His voice was nervous. "Yes, they fell to the floor," my mother said. "We just picked them up." "It was an accident," my father said. "Oh, accidents happen," I told them. "Those papers," my mother said, "were they work-related?" "Yes," father said. "Were they part of a case you're working on?" "Just research," I said. "They must be important files if you brought them home," my father said. "Is anyone in trouble? Perhaps someone we know?" "What's going on here?" I asked them. "Is this about Mrs. Kwok? Are you still mad at me for sending her to a labor farm? She was caught red-handed stealing coal from the furnace. You know the rules." "Don't get mad," my mother said. "We were just showing concern for the unlucky souls in your files." "Unlucky?" I said. "What makes you call them that?" They both went silent. Slowly, I waved my mother's file once before her eyes, yet she made no track of it. Then I fanned her with the file. When the breeze moved across her face, she recoiled, inhaling. What is it? My father asked. What just happened? She said nothing. Can you see me, Mother? I asked. It's important that I know if you can see me. She faced my direction, though her eyes were without focus. Can I see you? She asked me. I see you as I first saw you, in glimpses through darkness. Spare me the riddles, I warned her. I have to know the truth. You were born at night, she said to me. I labored all day, and when darkness fell, we had no candles. You came by feel into your father's hands. These hands, my father said, and lifted them, scarred from machine looms. Such was the year Juche 62, my mother said. Such was life in a dormitory factory. Your father lit match after match, one after another, he said, until they were gone. I touched every part of your body, my mother told me. At first, to see if you were whole, and then to know you. So new you were, so innocent. You could have become anyone. It took a while until first light that we got a look at what we'd created. I need to be able to trust you, I told her. I can't have you lying to me. My mother ignored this. Our eyes do not work. That's the answer to your question. But then as now, we don't need sight to see what you've become. The next day, at Division 42, I found Commander Ga strapped into an interrogation bench with a patch of raw pink tissue where his tattoo had been. I touched him on the cheek. You know of love, I told him. How did you get people to share their secrets? Voluntarily, I mean. My breath upon his wound made him wince. First, you must share all of yours, Ga said. I don't have any secrets, I told him. You want a new life, don't you? He asked. I nodded. Then you must trade in your old one, he told me. They were going to kill him in the soccer stadium in the morning. I only wished I could hook him up to the autopilot, which erases your identity and prepares you for life as a laborer in a rural farm collective. Think of it, a fresh start, children, a wife. What about a new life for you? I asked Commander Ga. I've had my life, he said. I've been thinking about making a journey, I told him. But how can I do it alone? How did you make the journey? One day I just began, he said, then squelched his eyes from the pain. I put a bandage on his wound, then leaned in close. I'm not going to let them take you to the soccer stadium, I told him. I headed home in the middle of the day with that can of peaches in my hand. There, I removed my shoes in the hall and silently opened the door. Inside, the loudspeaker was blaring, and my parents were at the table with their secret files spread before them. They were whispering to one another as they ran their fingers across the pages, feeling the labels and embossed seals. I slammed the door behind me. The two of them froze. Who is it? My father asked. Who's there? Are you a thief? My mother asked. I assure you we have nothing to steal. They were both looking right at me, though they seemed not to see me. Across the table, their hands sought one another and joined. Go away, my father said. Leave us alone, or we'll tell our son. My mother felt around the table until she located a spoon. She grabbed its handle and held it like a knife. You don't want our son to find out about this, she said. He's a torturer. Oh, Mother, Father, I said. No need to worry, it's only me. But it's the middle of the day, my father said. You don't come home during the middle of the day. Everything's fine, I told him. But I'm going to have a long night tonight and some long tomorrows. I might not be here to cook your dinner or help you to the bathroom. Don't worry about us, my mother said. We can manage. If you have to go, go. I do have to go, I said. I walked to the kitchen. From a drawer, I removed the can opener. I paused there at the window. Spending my days underground, I wasn't used to the midday brightness. I think you're afraid of me, I said to them, because I'm a mystery to you, because you don't really know me. I thought they'd protest, but they were silent. I took the spoon from my mother's hand. Well, you won't have to worry ever again, I told him, because today you're going to meet the real me. I sunk the opener into the can and began to cut a slow circle. My father sniffed the air. Peaches? He asked. That's right, I told him, in their own sweet liquor. From the night market? My mother asked. Actually, I acquired them from my friend, Commander Ga, I said. My father inhaled deeply. I can practically see those peaches, he said. It's been so long since I've tasted a peach, my mother said. We used to get a coupon in our ration book every month. My father said, oh, that was years ago. I suppose you're right, she answered. I'm just saying, we used to love peaches, and then one day you couldn't get them anymore. Well, allow me, I told them. Open. Like children, they widened their mouths. In anticipation, my father closed his milky eyes. I stirred the can, selected a slice, then I slipped it into my mother's mouth. She said. I fed my father next. There was silence, except for the blaring loudspeaker as they savored the moment. In unison, they said, thank you, dear leader Kim Jong-Il. Yes, I told them, you have him to thank. I stirred the can again, hunted down the next slice. I mentioned my new friend, Commander Ga, I said. Is he a friend from work? My father asked. Yes, he's a friend from work, I said. The two of us have become quite close. He's given me hope that love is out there for me. He's a man who has true love. I've studied his case very closely, and I think the secret to love is sacrifice. He himself has made the ultimate sacrifice for the woman he loves. He gave his life for her, my father said. Actually, he took her life, I told him, and popped another peach in his mouth. There was a quake in my mother's voice. We're happy for you, she said. As the dear leader says, love makes the world go round. So don't hesitate. Go find that true love. We can take care of ourselves. I spooned a slice into her mouth. It caught her by surprise and she coughed. Perhaps from time to time, I said, you have seen me writing my biography. As you know, that's what I do for a living, write people's biographies, not torture them. We keep these biographies in what you might call a private library. Commander Ga says, the problem with the biographies I take is that no one ever reads them. This Commander Ga said, the only person who'd want to read his biography is now dead. I dished out new slices with ample syrup. Person, my father said, meaning the lady that your friend loves? Yes, I said. The lady that your friend killed? My mother said. And her kids, I told them. There's a tragic aspect to the story. There's no denying it. The peaches were half gone. I stirred them in their can. Save some for yourself, my father said. Yes, that's enough, my mother said. I haven't tasted sweet in so long. My stomach can't handle it. I shook my head no. This is a rare can of peaches, I said. I was going to keep them for myself, but taking the easy way, that's not the answer to life's problems. My mother's lip started to quiver. She covered it with her hand. But back to my problem, I said. My own biography and the difficulty I've had writing it, this biographer's block I've been suffering from, I see it so clearly now. It came from the fact that deep down, no one wanted to hear my story. Then my friend got a tattoo of his dead wife, yet he claimed the tattoo wasn't public but personal. Though it was there for the world to see, it was truly for no one but himself. Losing that, my friend lost everything, really. How can a person lose a tattoo? My father asked. Unfortunately, it's easier than you'd think, I told him. But it got me thinking, though, and I realized I wasn't composing for posterity or the dear leader or the good of the people. No, the ones who needed to hear my story were the people I loved, right here in front of me, who'd started to think of me as a stranger. But your friend, he killed the people he loved, right? It's unfortunate, I know. There's no forgiving him for it, but let me get started with my biography. I was born in Pyongyang, I began, to parents who were factory workers. My mother and father were older, but they were good parents. They survived every worker purge and avoided denunciation and re-education. But we already know these things, my father said. His breath was sweet with peaches. Shh, I told him. You can't talk back to the story of your life. We're getting close. This is the last commercial break. It was late when I appeared in Commander Gau's room. He asked, "Is it morning already?" "Not yet," I told him. "There's still time." "I'm getting a new life," I told him. "Are you coming with me?" And he nodded. I helped him across Division 42 to an interrogation bay where I rolled him into a baby blue autopilot chair. "It won't be a bad journey," I told him. "On the other side, there won't be pubiak or cattle prods or box cutters. Hopefully, you'll get sent to a rural farm collective. Not an easy life, but you can start a new family and serve your nation in the true spirit of communism through labor and devotion." "I told you," Commander Gau said. "I've had my life." I grabbed 2 sedatives. When Commander Gau declined one, I took them both. From the supply cabinet, I flipped through the diapers until I found a medium. "Would you like one?" I asked. "We keep some on hand for when VIPs come through. It can save some embarrassment." "No thanks," he said. I dropped my trousers and secured mine. "You know I respect you," I told him. "You were the only guy who came through that never talked. You were smart. If you had told us where the actress was, they'd have killed you right away. Are you going to hook me up to that machine?" I nodded. He looked at the autopilot's wires and energy meters. "There's no mystery," he said. "The actress simply defected." You never stop, do you? You're about to lose everything but your own heartbeat, and you're still trying to throw us off the trail. "It's true," he said. "She got on an airplane and flew away." "Impossible," I told him. "Under the nose of the dear leader, you insult me." I handed him a pair of paper booties. He sat on his baby blue chair, and I sat on mine, and together we removed our shoes and socks to put them on. "Not to insult you," he said, "but whose pictures do you think are on my phone? My wife and children vanished, but then from far away, photos of a woman and her children appear. Is that such a mystery?" It's a conundrum, I'll admit. I pondered it much, but I know you killed the people you loved. There's no other way. He indicated the leather restraints. "You're not going to put those on me, are you?" "I have to. I'm sorry," I told him. "I need people to know that I did this to you and not the other way around." I reclined his chair, then strapped down Commander Gau's legs and arms. I did him the favor of leaving the buckles pretty loose. "I'm sorry I didn't manage to finish your biography," I told him. "If I hadn't failed, I could have sent your biography with you, so when you reached the other side, you could read who you were and become you again." "Don't worry," he told me. "She'll be on the other side. She'll recognize me, tell me who I am." "I can offer you this," I said, holding up a pen. "If you like, you can write your name someplace on your body, a place they won't notice, between your toes perhaps. That way later you might discover who you were." "Are you going to do it?" he asked me. "I don't want to know who I was," I said. "I don't even know what name I'd write," Gau said. I knelt to connect all the electrodes to his cranium. "Relax," I said. "This isn't an end to your story." He said, "My story's ended 10 times already, yet it never stops. Orphans, friends, commanding officers, I outlast them all." "This isn't the end to you," I told him. "It's a new beginning, and you haven't outlasted your friends. We're friends, aren't we?" He stared at the ceiling like a parade of people he'd once known was passing there. "I know why I'm in this blue chair," he said. "What about you?" Aligning all the red and white wires leading from his skull was like braiding hair. "This used to be a place," I told him, "where meaningful work was done. Here a citizen was separated from his story. That was my job. Of the two, it was the story that was kept while the person was disposed of. I was okay with that. In this way, many subversives were discovered, but now," God turned to look at me. "Yes? Now, the person is lost along with his life." I adjusted the output dial of his autopilot. Gau had a strong mind, so I set it at 8. "Tell me again how intimacy works," I demanded of him. "It turned out to be easy," Gau said. You tell someone everything, the good, the bad, what makes you look strong and what's shameful as well. If you killed your wife's husband, you got to tell her. I told you everything, best as I was able. I nodded. It was satisfying to hear again. It restored my inner calm. With my parents, I had finally been intimate. And Commander Ga was my friend, despite the lie about the actress being alive. He'd so fully digested it that somehow it had become true to him. By his twisted logic, he was telling me, his friend, the absolute truth. See you on the other side, I said. He fixed his eyes at some point that didn't exist. My mother was a singer, he said. When he closed his eyes, I flipped the switch. He made the usual involuntary motions, eyes flashing, arm levitation, gulping for air like a carp at the surface of a meditation pond. My mother was a singer, were his last words, as if they were the only ones he could trust to describe who he'd been. I climbed into the next blue chair, but I didn't bother with the restraints. I wanted the Pubiao to know I'd taken my own path. I hooked up my own wiring harness and turned my attention to the autopilot's output dial. I never wanted to remember a thing about this place, so I set it at 8.5. But then again, I didn't want a lobotomy either. I adjusted it to 7.5, and if I was being intimate with myself, I could also admit I was afraid of the pain. I settled for 6. Trembling with hope and, strangely, regret, I finger flipped the switch. My arms rose before me. They looked like someone else's arms. A tongue of electricity licked deep inside my brain, probing as molars are inspected after a meal. Everything was singular. The gleam of a metal armature, the violent green of a fly's eye. There was only the thing itself, without connection or context, as if everything in your mind had become unlinked to everything else. Blue and leather and chair, I couldn't put them together. The fine hairs in my nose stiffened. My erection stood abominable and alone. I saw no icy white peak or flower. I scanned the room for them, but saw only elements: shine, slick, coarse, shade. I became aware of Commander Ga moving beside me. He had an arm free from its restraint, and he was reaching for the dial. I saw him turn it to maximum, a lethal dose. But I could worry about him no longer. I was on my own voyage. Soon I would be in a rural village, green and peaceful, where people swung their scythes in silence. There would be a widow there, and we would waste no time on courtship. I would approach her and tell her I was her new husband. Soon our genitals would intercourse in a way that was correct and satisfying. At night, after I made my admission, we would lay there, listening to the sounds of our children in the dark, catching summer frogs. My wife would have the use of her eyes, so she would know when I blew out the candle. In this village, I would have a name, and people would call me by it. When the candle went out, she would speak to me, telling me to sleep very, very deeply. And as the electricity stropped itself sharper in my mind, I listened for her voice, calling a name that would soon be mine. Okay, I'll stop there. The story takes a turn for the tragic after this. So I thought I would end on an up note.